Welcome to this exploration of consciousness, coherence, and human evolution. I'm Dr. Carol Talbot, and we're diving deeper into multidimensional intelligence, exploring the architecture of awareness, the science of spirit, and the next evolution of human potential. Now we're moving into the place where consciousness meets biology and where the invisible becomes embodied. So in episode 1, we explored consciousness as a source code of reality. Then in episode 2, we stepped into the invisible internet, the non-local field of intelligence that connects everything. The focus in this episode is how that intelligence enters form, how it becomes biological experience, and why DNA sits at the center of that translation. So this isn't about redefining consciousness again. It's about understanding why awareness sometimes changes everything and at other times seems to change very little. It's about why insight can feel profound yet fail to stabilize as energy, vitality, clarity, or ease. And the answer lies in your DNA, one of the most misunderstood structures in human existence. Before I go further, let me make this practical. If you've ever had a period where you understood yourself deeply, you knew what needed to change, you had the insight, yet still your energy, your sleep, your body, or your patterns didn't shift the way you expected, then this episode is for you. It's about why the body often moves at a different pace than the mind and how to work with that intelligently. Most people were educated to think of DNA as a biological instruction manual that determines physical traits, health risks, tendencies. And that framing subtly conditions you to relate to the body as something preset, something you manage or compensate for rather than work with intelligently. A much more accurate and far more useful way to understand DNA is as the hardware interface of the human system. So if consciousness is the operating intelligence and the wider field is the informational environment, then DNA is the mechanism that allows information to be translated into cellular behavior. This distinction matters because many people attempt to change their lives at the level of thought and intention, while their biology continues to operate from a very different set of signals. Thought is important, and it's not the fastest or most influential input the body receives. DNA responds first and foremost to state. It responds to the overall conditions of the system, emotional tone, nervous system regulation, relational safety, and environmental rhythm. When these conditions signal stability, then DNA prioritizes repair, regeneration, and coherence. When they signal threat or urgency, DNA reallocates resources towards protection and survival. Let me give you a simpler example first. Think about the days when you wake up and your mind is already sprinting. You haven't even stood up yet, but you're planning, solving, anticipating. Now, you may call that productivity, yet your body experiences it as pressure. Your nervous system tightens, breathing shortens, and your biology receives a signal that the day is urgent. Now compare that with a morning when you wake up and take one slow breath before you reach for anything else, and your system gets a very different signal. There's time, there's space, there's safety. Now, over time, those small differences train biology in completely different directions. Another way to see this at work is through trauma, and especially the kind that's no longer consciously remembered. Someone may understand intellectually that they're safe now, They may have insight, self-awareness, and a strong desire to move forward, yet their body continues to respond as if there's a threat. Their muscles remain subtly braced, their breath stays shallow, their nervous system remains on alert, and in that state, DNA is not responding to their current circumstances or conscious intentions, it's responding to the biological memory of danger. And this is why people can say, "I know it's over," and still feel exhausted, reactive, or unable to relax. The thinking mind has updated, but the body has not. DNA continues to receive signals of urgency through the nervous system and prioritizes protection over repair. That means energy is channeled into vigilance rather than regeneration. And over time, this shows up as fatigue, inflammation, accelerated aging, or a persistent sense of being on edge, even in objectively safe environments. What's important to understand here is that this is not pathology or failure. It's adaptive intelligence. DNA is doing exactly what it evolved to do: respond to state. It listens more closely to the rhythm of the nervous system than to the content of thought. So until the body experiences safety at a physiological level, biology continues to organize itself around survival. This is also why purely cognitive approaches often reach a ceiling. Insight alone doesn't necessarily change cellular behavior. Biology updates through experience, through changes in breath, posture, relational safety, and internal rhythm. When those signals shift consistently, DNA begins to reallocate resources away from defense and back toward coherence, alignment, and repair. And at that point, change that once felt like an effort begins to stabilize naturally, and not because the person is trying harder, but simply because the body is no longer preparing for danger. A contrasting example can be seen in people who experience rapid shifts in health, in energy or clarity, once a sense of safety and coherence is restored. And this often occurs through a change in environment or relational context. Someone may leave a prolonged high-pressure role, resolve a long-standing interpersonal conflict, or enter a space where they feel genuinely seen and supported. Without altering their diet or exercise routine or mindset strategies, their sleep improves, inflammation reduces, and energy returns. From a biological perspective, what has changed is not belief, but state. The nervous system moves out of sustained alert and into regulation. Breath deepens, muscular tension softens, the internal rhythm of the system just slows. DNA receives a very different set of signals and reallocates resources accordingly. So processes that were previously suppressed in favor of survival, such as tissue repair, immune regulation, and metabolic balance, all of those come back online. This is often described by individuals as like feeling themselves again, rather than feeling improved or fixed. The shift feels organic and stabilizing rather than effortful. The body recognizes conditions that allow coherence and alignment and responds by reorganizing itself around regeneration instead of protection. And in these cases, change doesn't arise from doing more, but simply by removing the conditions that required constant adaptation. Together, these examples highlight a central point. DNA doesn't respond to explanation or intention alone. It responds to lived conditions. So when those conditions support safety, rhythm, alignment, and coherence, your biology naturally moves towards balance. And this responsiveness is intelligence. DNA evolved to help organisms adapt to their environment. So the difficulty arises when modern life creates persistent internal stress without obvious external danger. The body receives a steady stream of signals suggesting pressure, evaluation, and time scarcity, and then DNA adjusts accordingly. And over time, this shapes your energy levels, your immune function, aging patterns, and even perception itself. And what's often misunderstood is that DNA functions as a listener and translator. It receives information from the internal and external environment and adjusts its expression in response. So this is why people with similar genetic material can live in very different states of health and vitality, and why emotional experiences can leave lasting biological imprints even without changing genetic sequence. The code remains stable, while expression remains dynamic. One way to see this is in people who share very similar genetic backgrounds, yet age and function completely differently. So brothers and sisters raised in the same household often carry the same genetic predispositions, yet one may remain energetic, adaptable, and resilient into later life, while the other struggles with chronic fatigue, inflammation, or stress-related illness. The difference is rarely explained by genetics alone. It's far more often linked to how each person's nervous system learned how to respond to life. So one may have developed a baseline of safety and flexibility, while the other brother or sister adapted to prolonged pressure or emotional responsibility. So their DNA didn't change, the conditions it was responding to did. Another common example appears in high-functioning professionals who perform well for years and years under sustained pressure. From the outside, of course, they look successful and capable, yet over time the body begins to signal strain. Sleep becomes lighter, recovery slower, their immune system less robust, and often medical tests reveal no clear genetic cause. What's happened instead is that DNA has been listening to a prolonged state of urgency. It's adjusted expression to support performance and vigilance rather than repair and regeneration. So when that pressure eventually lifts, many people are surprised by how quickly their body begins to recover, sometimes without any targeted intervention. Biology responds not to job titles or lifestyle narrative, but to the internal conditions that accompany them. Emotional experience often provides another clear illustration. Many people carry sensitivities or reactions that cannot be traced to conscious memory or personal history. A persistent startle response, or difficulty relaxing, or a tendency toward hypervigilance may exist even when life appears stable. These patterns are often linked to earlier emotional environments or inherited stress responses rather than changes in genetic sequence. DNA has registered patterns of emotional tone and organized the body accordingly. So when those patterns are gradually replaced with experiences of safety and regulation, the body begins to relax and reorganize itself. And over time, responses that once felt automatic soften without the need for conscious control. These examples point to the same principle. DNA is not issuing commands, it's interpreting information. So it remains structurally stable while expression remains fluid, adapting continuously to the signals it receives. Health, vitality, and resilience emerge not from changing the code itself, from changing the conditions in which that code is being read. Are you with me here? Now, the structure of DNA does help explain its responsiveness. Its spiral geometry and repeating patterns allow it to interact efficiently with electromagnetic fields and subtle informational signals. When DNA is described as a fractal antenna, this actually refers to its capacity to receive, organize, and transmit information across multiple scales at once. It translates non-local information into local biological instruction, allowing the body to stay aligned with its environment and internal state. So when I say DNA functions like a fractal antenna, I'm pointing to a very simple idea here. It's shaped to receive information at many levels at once, just like a radio with multiple bands. Your phone can pick up Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, cellular signals, GPS, different layers of information running through one device. And your DNA behaves more like that than you've been led to believe. Now, one of the most compelling areas of research supporting this view comes from studies of biophotons. Living cells emit light, and this light appears to play a role in communication and coordination within the body. Chemical reactions alone are way too slow to explain the speed and synchronization observed in biological systems. Light-based signaling allows information to move really rapidly, aligning cellular processes across tissues and organs. So DNA appears to act as an organizer of this light and shaping how information flows through your system. A helpful way to think of biophotons is this. Chemistry is like sending letters through the post, whereas light is like sending messages instantly. And your body uses both. Chemistry builds and maintains structure, whereas light helps coordinate timing and communication. And this understanding sheds light on phenomena that are otherwise difficult to explain, such as the speed with which emotions affect physiology, or the way that trauma can imprint deeply even when it's not consciously remembered. Biology responds to patterns, not narratives. It registers coherence and incoherence long before conscious interpretation takes place. A really good example of this comes from experiments known as the phantom DNA effect. In these studies, DNA placed in a controlled environment influenced the arrangements of photons, light, around it. Yet when the DNA was removed, the photon pattern, the light pattern, stayed, it persisted. So the structure had left an informational imprint in the space itself. So this suggests that DNA shapes its surrounding field and that information can remain organized even in the absence of physical structure. And you've experienced a version of this without calling it science. So say you walk into a room after an argument, and yet you can feel it in the air, right? Nothing is being said, yet the atmosphere carries information. Or you enter a space where someone's been sick, unwell, or grieving, and your body registers it before your mind does. The field holds patterns, and DNA is sensitive to pattern. Your biology reads environments the way your eyes read color. When applied to lived experiences, this helps explain why the body remembers emotional states and relational dynamics long after events have passed. It also explains why certain environments feel supportive and others feel draining, why healing often requires more than an understanding. Biological systems respond to repeated patterns of state, gradually reorganizing around what they're consistently exposed to. Another important implication of this research is the relationship between DNA and time. Biological systems do not respond only to past inputs. They also adjust in response to anticipated conditions too. The nervous system and cellular environment respond to probability, orienting the body toward what it expects to encounter. So a system conditioned to urgency prepares differently from one conditioned to stability. And over time, this shapes timing, intuition, and responsiveness to opportunity. And what this brings us to is a very practical point that's often missed, even by people who are very highly self-aware. DNA is being shaped consciously, not primarily through deliberate techniques or dramatic interventions, but simply through the ordinary states we live every single day. Your body is always listening to patterns, the quality of attention you bring to the first moments of the morning, the emotional tone that runs quietly beneath your day, the way you relate to rest and recovery, and the degree of pressure or ease that characterizes your inner world. Biology is far more responsive to what's repeated, so small, consistent signals accumulate and they shape expression over time far more reliably than an occasional effort or insight. This is the reason why embodiment sits at the center of multidimensional intelligence. Change doesn't occur through force or instruction, but through allowing the system to return to coherence and alignment. When the nervous system settles, breath naturally deepens. And when breath deepens, internal rhythm slows. When rhythm slows, biological processes reorganize without effort. DNA responds to harmony in the same way a musical instrument responds to being brought back in tune. It doesn't need to be told what to do. It just needs the right conditions in which to do it. And I want to make this personal for a moment because in my life, I've watched what happens when my system shifts from mind-led to field-led. You know, there was a time when I could carry a lot externally and still feel internally rushed. My brain was sharp, my output was high, but my body was paying the price quietly in the background through sleep quality, recovery, that subtle sense of being braced all the time. And as my work deepened, what changed first wasn't my schedule. It was my baseline energy frequency, if you want to call it. I started to notice that when I held alignment, coherence, when I slowed my breath down, softened attention, and let my body lead, then time opened. Decisions became cleaner and clearer. I stopped needing to push for clarity because clarity arrived. And what surprised me most was how quickly my body responded once the signal changed. So it felt like my biology had been waiting for permission to return to a more intelligent rhythm. And this is also where entrainment becomes especially relevant. Now, entrainment's not a technique in the conventional sense. It's a principle that governs all living systems. In physics and biology, systems naturally synchronize with the strongest and most coherent rhythm present. And you can see this in pendulums gradually swinging in unison, in heart rhythms aligning between individuals, and in neural oscillations settling into shared patterns. And the human system is no different. When a stable reference frequency is present, the body aligns to it without effort. Within the multidimensional intelligence framework, entrainment exists to provide that reference point. And the entrainment audio series that I developed is in response to a recurring observation. People could understand the field intellectually, even experience moments of expanded awareness, yet they struggled to stabilize those states in daily life. Insight arrived, but alignment didn't always remain. Biology hadn't yet caught up with perception. The purpose of the entrainment series is to support that transition from insight to embodiment. So each audio transmission is designed to introduce a very aligned rhythmic field through sound, breath, and subtle frequency layering, allowing your nervous system to experience regulation rather than try to achieve it. So there's nothing to visualize, nothing to analyze or force. The system is simply exposed to a very coherent, aligned pattern and allowed to respond in its own time. Now, some of the people who've already worked with the entrainment series often describe their first experience as unexpectedly ordinary. There's no sense of effort or peak experience. Instead, they feel that feeling of being met, as though their body recognizes something it's been missing. Muscular tension softens, breath deepens naturally, attention settles without instruction. These responses are physiological indicators that the system has found a stable rhythm. And with repeated exposure, the entrainment series trains your nervous system to stabilize more easily. Regulation becomes more accessible, even in situations that previously triggered reactivity or fatigue. DNA begins to respond to a different baseline frequency, a different baseline state, not because it's being directed, but because the conditions it's reading have changed. Repair, regeneration, and coherence are supported simply by the consistency of the signal. So in this way, the entrainment audio series functions more like an environmental shift. Just as time spent outside in nature reorganizes the system naturally without instruction, entrainment provides a coherent internal environment that the body can entrain to. So over time, this changes how the system meets stress, how quickly it recovers, and how stable clarity and intuition come about. And this is why entrainment is a stabilizing layer that supports the biology of awareness. It allows the intelligence that you already have access to through insight and perception to land more fully in your body, so that coherence and alignment become lived rather than sporadic now and then episodes. So in practical terms, people use the entrainment audio series when they want their system to stabilize without effort. Maybe first thing in the morning or before sleep when the mind runs ahead of the body. Maybe before a high-stakes conversation when the nervous system wants to brace. Or after intense work when the system needs a very clean reset. And what happens is over time, it becomes a way of recalibrating your internal climate so that coherence is your baseline rather than something that you visit occasionally. So you may notice your breath deepening without trying, your jaw unclenching, your shoulders dropping, or a quiet sense of internal space returning. Many people report clearer decisions and fewer second-guessing loops because the internal signal becomes less noisy. Within the multidimensional intelligence framework, there's also tools such as the multidimensional field scan, which provides a way to observe how these dynamics are currently operating. And the scan offers a snapshot of how energetic architecture, timelines, and biological tendencies are interacting in the present moment for you. It reveals where coherence is well established and where energy is also being dissipated, maybe through strain, adaptation, or unresolved patterns. And this awareness alone can be deeply clarifying, as it explains why certain efforts have produced limiting results despite genuine commitment. And from there, deeper mentoring and entrainment work support the stabilization of coherence so that insight and intuition becomes embodied rather than here and now or temporary. So people often notice changes that feel both subtle, profound, and unmistakable. Energy no longer spikes and crashes in the same way. Decision-making feels clearer, less driven by urgency, and the body feels more responsive and less reactive. In other words, life begins to organize with less effort because the system itself is no longer sending mixed signals into the field. This is the deeper promise of working with your DNA as an interface rather than a destiny. Evolution is not something abstract or distant. It unfolds in cells, in timing, in how life is metabolized from one moment to the next. And when alignment and coherence is restored at the biological level, then your intelligence expresses itself much more fully through form. Your actions become more precise, rest becomes more effective, and creativity and intuition stabilize rather than appearing only in fleeting moments. And so as you move through your day, it can be helpful to hold a very simple awareness. Your DNA is not responding to what you tell yourself, but to how you live on a regular basis, because it listens to rhythm, to presence, to the conditions you create within your own system. And over time, those conditions become your biology. So in the next episode, I'll explore coherence itself as the stabilizing state that allows perception, biology, and timelines to all align and come together. So coherence is a measurable and trainable condition that underpins your health, your clarity, and your creative flow. And it's the state that allows multidimensional intelligence to become sustainable rather than episodic. So for now, allow this understanding to settle. There's nothing here that requires fixing or effort. Your system has been adapting intelligently to the signals it has received. With awareness and presence, it becomes capable of adapting in new and more aligned ways. So if you take nothing else from this episode, take this. Your biology is trainable through rhythm, through entrainment. So choose one place in your day to practice coherence. 1 minute maybe before you open your laptop, 1 minute before you answer messages, 1 minute before you eat. And remember, through doing that, you're teaching your DNA what reality feels like through repetition. And this is how evolution becomes practical. I'm Dr. Carol Talbot, guiding you to reimagine intelligence, awaken your DNA blueprint, and live as the multidimensional being you truly are.